And I'll recognize Mr. Engel for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Deutsch. Ranking Member Wilson, thank you for calling this hearing. And Special Representative Hook, thank you for appearing here today. I have been among the biggest critics of the Tehran regime in Congress. I didn't vote for the JCPOA because I felt it didn't prevent Iran from having nuclear weapons. It only postponed it. I didn't like the fact that they would be awash with cash to continue their terrorist activities. Iran is the world's most prolific state sponsor of terrorism. Its support for the Assad regime, its abysmal record on human rights, its imprisonment of Americans, and all this harmful behavior has isolated Iran and made them a threat to our security and that of our allies and partners. These destabilizing and dangerous behaviors must end. And frankly, Iran's recent attacks on tankers in the Straits of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman are setting the region on a course to war. We obviously need to de-escalate this situation before the worst happens. However, the administration's most recent steps seem to be pushing us more toward confrontation than negotiation. The carrier group rushing through the arms sale to Saudi Arabia, and we did a lot of work on that in this committee last week, coming up with a phony emergency to circumvent Congress and get these missiles to Saudi Arabia, putting more boots on the ground for supposedly defensive reasons, all framed by increasingly belligerent rhetoric. It does bother me because we should be trying to prevent confrontation. So I want to tell you what I see, Mr. Hook. I see a growing risk of miscalculation. I see more and more scenarios that could spark a conflict that could lead to the United States stumbling into war. And what I'd like to hear from the administration is the clearest possible statement that the United States is not looking for a war with Iran and how we can get Iran back to the negotiating table. And if we can't hear that from the administration, I want to make it very clear, Mr. Hook, that military action against Iran without the approval of Congress is absolutely not an option. Congress has co-equal powers under the Constitution. And, you know, we went through 20 years of going along with wars because we were told certain things were a fact when, in fact, they weren't. So I think that Congress has to play a major role. And the AUMF of 2001 has no relevance to the situation with Iran today. And I will resist the administration using that as an excuse to go to war. If the administration sees a threat that requires military force against Iran, your first step is right here on Capitol Hill. There is no law, no aging authorization from another conflict, that's the 2001 AUMF, that could apply to war against Iran. The administration would need prior authorization from Congress before going to war. So I want to just make my position very clear and say that my opinions of the Iranian regime have not changed. They're dangerous. They're the most dangerous regime in the Middle East, and they're the #1 state sponsor of terrorism. But that's not an excuse for the United States to plunge into another war without congressional approval. Let me ask you this, Mr. Hook. Secretary Pompeo said last week that Iran was conducting these attacks in the Gulf to convince the United States to lift its, and I quote him, successful maximum pressure campaign, unquote. While sanctions and other forms of pressure have undoubtedly hampered Iran's economy, there's little indication they have changed the behavior of the Iranian government or reduced Tehran's regional influence. So how would you define success in terms of the maximum pressure campaign?
In my opening statement, I presented a number of things that we are seeing in the region that suggest that Iran's proxies do not have the financial means that they used to under the Iran deal because our sanctions are denying the regime historic levels of revenue. Iran provides Hezbollah, Mr. Chairman, I'm sure as you know, 70% of its operating budget. That's $700 million a year. The leader of Hezbollah in March had to make a public appeal for donations. It's the first time they've done that in their history. You have Shia proxies in Syria saying to the New York Times, the golden days are gone and they're never coming back. Iran does not have the money that it used to. I mentioned there has been a 28% cut to Iran's military budget in March. During the Iran nuclear deal, Iran's military spending reached record levels. So our sanctions are working, and they are denying the regime the revenue that it otherwise would spend on Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Shia proxies in Syria, Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, underground groups in Bahrain. And so that's a very good thing. It is also the case that Iran has never come to the negotiating table in its 40-year history without pressure. And prior administrations have, sorry.
So can I, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I want to, it's in reference to what you're saying now. So is our ultimate goal, or is the administration's ultimate goal, to compel Iran to negotiate? And does your strategy match the intelligence community's assessment on how to get Iran to negotiate?
It does. It does.
It does. Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my time is out.
Thank you, Chairman Engel. Ranking Member McCall.